All right. Hi, everybody. So again, as I mentioned, my name is Alex Danilchev, and I'm going to talk today about micro apps. And it's going to be maybe a little bit unusual presentation because I'm sure you probably heard already a few presentations on micro apps before. And Alex, I think you did have some sessions, right, during your conference this time as well?
Yeah.
All right. So from that perspective, again, hopefully I'll add something of interest. So let's talk about the micro app interpreter here. So that was my mini project, kind of my mini entry into Citrix Hackathon actually challenge, which I found yesterday. I actually won among Citrites. So which is kind of interesting. Apparently it was announced this morning, but I haven't seen the announcement yet. So anyway, so hopefully there was some value since it was selected as a winner. So anyway, so let's see if I can convince you that there is something for you guys as well. Okay. Now, this is kind of a formal intro slide. Kind of I butchered my couple other presentations, but in essence, here's the deal. When we take a look at micro apps implementations, right? So micro apps usually do not exist in a vacuum, right? There is a reason why people, will go and pretty much start integrating different kind of dissimilar systems. And sometimes we as architects, as administrators are looking for whatever glue we can find to glue things together, right? And in my humble opinion, micro apps can actually serve as that glue in essence, right? To make things that apparently incompatible actually work quite well together, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a look at the architecture that I had proposed, that what we can do with it, we can actually interface RESTful interfaces, which micro apps pretty much are geared towards, with non-RESTful APIs, right? So in other words, if somebody kind of bought into the idea of micro apps and they're ready to deploy them, and they ask the question, well, can micro apps do this? Like, can micro apps connect to my coffee maker, right? Usually the answer is no, but we're working on it, right? Well, here the answer will be yes, we can, right? And again, I'll show how it's actually done. There is also a concept of SSL bridging and low-code app proxies. I will kind of go through step by step what this thing actually means. But for people that are familiar with ADCs like Citrix NetScalers, they'll be very familiar with bridging. This is one of the easy functions to do and actually quite powerful. So if we couple it with kind of this low-code app proxy that I'm going to talk about, it actually becomes very powerful, and you can hook things up really easily to pretty much your environment. All right, and at the end, I'll give you quite a few links. So if you guys have, Alex will provide the recording, but if you like, you can snap some of the QR barcodes that I will provide you with. So you will actually get those links right away. So you don't need to type it. So you can pretty much go to the links that I'm providing. And there's some really interesting kind of small little projects, small tutorials that will take you step by step through this process. Okay, so, okay, let me expand through this. SSL bridging low-code app proxy. So in essence, if we take a look at micro app implementation, usually the assumption is there is some sort of a RESTful API, right, that hopefully is well documented. And actually, it's a beauty of REST because usually they are actually quite well documented inherently based on the RESTful architecture, right? So you will be able to talk to those systems, and for the most part, we're talking about HTTP communications. So you'll be able to send, get, post, put requests, whatever, right? So pretty much fairly simple kind of negotiation with the server, what you want the server to do, right? Now, if we take a look how Citrix, and again, just disclaimer, I'm a Citrix employee. This is my kind of a private project, but again, so I definitely work for Citrix and empowered in a few areas, pretty much having access to some of the environments they can play with, right? So, but the point is, besides micro apps themselves, as I mentioned before, you probably be looking to integrating different systems from Citrix as well, and not necessarily Citrix, from Citrix partners and competitors, right? What you can do, you can actually leverage Citrix connected ecosystem right? And microapps can actually make it much easier, because you will find out that in some circumstances, those connectors do talk to pre-select number of systems, but they kind of stand separate from each other. And with microapps, if you tune it right, you can actually tie everything together, right? All right, so let's take a look at the use case. This is kind of a fairly straightforward situation where, let's say, we have physicians at hospitals, attending the patients. There is a help desk that will assist in case physician's computer got stuck or something to that effect. But sometimes help desk is not empowered to do things that beyond their access level. So that will be passed to IT staff to kind of address things that kind of on a more global level. And if IT staff is not able of doing things, well, developers will have to step in and maybe patch code that particular physician will be able to actually do the work. Now, notice how many steps are involved, right? So it will be nice, and when, let's say, physicians can actually press a button and kind of address the simple computer stuck issue when IT actually figures out how to make it completely seamless and remove that button. Or if the help desk, right, does some routine tasks, right? So instead of following a script, which they usually do, they just, again, have something that allows them kind of to press a few buttons, the few buttons possible, right? Use automation that developers and IT staff put together, and pretty much, in essence, kind of let users help themselves, kind of an approach, right? And then, well, this is usually what will happen, right? When we propose something like that, right? Okay, go and do it, right? So, well, let's go and address this use case, okay? So let me again populate this thing. So again, when we try to do something like this, a couple things come up, right? We can't really patch things for the sake of automation real quick. That will open some security holes, right? And when we have to also follow protocols, right? Physicians should not be kind of touching our hypervisors, right? Neither should probably developers, right? So we should have some sort of separation of duties and kind of make the entire exercise secure. At the same time, it has to be fast and responsive, and of course, it has to be cost effective, right? So again, sometimes it is important to spend a lot of money because it's worth it. But again, if we're saying things are easy and quick, well, usually we don't equate that to things being expensive, right? So let's keep that in mind. All right, so let's take a look at a really quick demo. Just it will show you pretty much one of the microapps that I had created. Let's see, I'll just talk over it. It has sound, but I'll just pretty much illustrate what it is. So what you're looking at, some of you are familiar with it, some of them might not. This is a Zen Center, pretty much a view into Citrix Hypervisor, right? On the right side, it's a microapp that I wrote that pretty much manipulates Citrix Hypervisor, kind of known as Zen Server. Now, if you have, Azure environment, if you have VMware, right, you can pretty much do the same thing with your own hypervisor. But the point here is this: this app, and to be completely frank, it took a couple of days to write. So between I had a really bad case of pneumonia, and then California had some major fires, like about 1 mile from my house, where like 100,000 people got evacuated. So between that and trying to submit this thing for the hackathon, right, it was kind of an interesting challenge. But the point is, it took like probably more time to put this thing together than for presentation than actually writing the code. So the bottom line is this. So this is a cell phone, right? You can use a web browser, right? You can do it actually through Citrix Workspace app as well. But you can manipulate hypervisor on the subject being, I will have access only to virtual machines that I'm entitled to, my personal VDI instances, right? And I will be able to power them up and down, which is kind of what's a big deal, right? But I also will be able to take snapshots and revert them as well, right? And I can also select whether I want to do snapshots with memory state, just the entire disk subsystem snapshot, or individual disk snapshot, right? This can also be easily extended with ability to change actually machine type, extend the resources, maybe extend the hard drive and so forth. So without the end user ever actually seeing what's happening behind the scenes, right? So in other words, you can gear it towards end user, pretty much like that physician, but be able to reset the machine. So probably one button will be sufficient. If you're looking at the help desk, maybe you'll give them more capabilities. And the same will go for IT stuff as well, right? So, and while developers developing apps like this, they won't necessarily need to know the infrastructure that we're providing with, sort of kind of having access to the interfaces with which they can interact with, let's say, this particular hypervisor. And also what's quite interesting is this. So I had only one pool and one host, right? So, but since the heavy lifting is done by the hypervisor infrastructure, I can literally make this application work with, let's say, 100 pools of 64 servers each, right? We're talking about very, very large environments, and I can do it on a mobile phone, right? So in other words, the amount of traffic this thing generates is really minimal. So, so I'll pause demo right here, and what we'll do just kind of gives you a taste what this thing actually is, and I'll talk a little bit about architecture. So Alex, is this something kind of digestible? I know I'm going a little bit fast. I don't know how much time I have, but
yeah, perfectly.
Yeah. So yeah, so it just gives you a taste what this demo is. All right. So okay, so I have hold on. Let me switch to another page. Okay, architecture. All right. So this is something again, kind of Citrix flavored, kind of a hybrid workspace environment. Really dumbed down diagram. You guys are very, very familiar with those. And again, Citrix partners and competitors have quite similar environments, right? But again, if you're deploying kind of apps and desktops, right? So in case of Citrix remote PCs, whatever. So this is something, nothing new, right? And what you can do to kind of to add this to this environment, and we're not talking about just, let's say, on-prem or cloud, right? We're kind of beyond that, right? So it's kind of all hybrid. Quite possibly will always stay hybrid, right? So, but in essence, if we want to spice it up with micro apps, that could be the first pretty much step in the right direction, where we can drop in micro app connection, micro app connector, and hook up to our, let's say in this case, on-prem hypervisors, right? And somehow we also have to figure out, all right, we have access to the hypervisor. We also have the brokering infrastructure for apps and desktops. We'll probably need to get some information from there as well. So we will talk about it, but you can pretty much tie in those things together, right? Now, what's interesting about this particular representation, when we're trying to reach to the on-prem resources, right? Micro apps actually have a so-called connect appliance, right? So it's a pretty much hardened appliance. You don't have any visibility what's inside. You won't be able to change, let's say, root certificates on that appliance, right? But that allows you to peek into your internal infrastructure. And the reason for choosing this particular kind of use case, I just pretty much selected the most difficult integration for micro apps, where instead of talking to RESTful interfaces available somewhere in the cloud, we actually have to jump through hoops and go through Citrix Connect appliance as well, right? Okay, and then Citrix Connect appliance has an interesting requirement. So it does require a fully certified certificate. So you cannot have your homegrown cert, definitely not self-signed certs. And even if you have your local certificate authority, since we cannot pre-socialize neither root nor intermediary certificates to the appliance, you will have to buy a cert for that implementation, right? Which is kind of a little bit of feels like limiting, but at the same time, this is what happens when you get an appliance, right? That you can not manipulate. All right, so let's go to the next page. And then once we've done that, and this is kind of our first baby steps, right? So again, we have this, we've seen, let's say, really nice presentation from Citrix, what those micro apps can do. There are a bunch of pre-built solutions that come with those micro apps. And this is where we'll probably just, at first, should get our feet wet, right? And while we're getting our feet wet, well, we'll have a bunch of questions probably, right? So this is a new system for us, and we're always asking probably what if before we get too far into it. So one of the questions is, well, how many authenticated SSL certs do we need, right? Notice I had one target system, I already have to use one certificate, right? So that could be a reasonable question to ask. Well, another question will be, well, this is the Connect appliance for micro apps. Well, how about CVAD service? I have another connector for that, right? How about Citrix files and so forth, right? How about Citrix ADC integration? Can we connect to other can we leverage other connectors, right? And then once we're kind of masterminding all of this, well, can we minimize the surface of attack? Because the more things we add, the more variables we add to the system, right? The more likely that we'll actually make things less secure, right? And then, as I mentioned, with our use case, we're also kind of looking for separation of duties, that once we put this modular system together, people that are responsible for one set of modules don't necessarily need to know about other modules. Like, for example, why would developers, why should developers know too much about our infrastructure? Because if they do, all of a sudden, every time we tweak it, hopefully to the better, right, we'll have to let them know that we tweaked something, right? Ideally, when we work on our separate individual modules, everything should work so nicely together that we don't really need to know, do those things and kind of pre-socialize information that should be kind of a black box for our audience, right? And then I'm sure many of you, the ones, especially the guys that went through Microapps class, right? After everything is working well, a good question is, well, can I hook up Notepad to this, right? I'm just kind of, it's not really a joke here, but in essence, can we hook up this or that to the system? And what we'll find out is that it's actually not that straightforward if RESTful APIs are not available, right? So that's kind of an interesting question to ask as well, and hopefully to get a good answer. And then after all of this, right, because the mantra of microapps is making things simple, right? You have a bunch of dissimilar systems over the years, when the IT organization grew, right? Those systems were plastered like old paint on top of each other, right? And things are getting actually more complex than they were before. The old things are not necessarily ripped out and replaced outright. So it's kind of always work in progress. So the question is, if microapps tells us it will make it simple, but we're adding more system, we're spending more money, will it actually be more simple? Is simplicity really possible? And also we need to keep our eye on the cost, right? Because if we're trying to reduce the cost, but we're still spending money, right? That's also not completely intuitive, right? So this is, we're coming to the premise of my presentation here, microapp interpreter. So in essence, what we're going to do here is this. If we have RESTful API requests, in other words, we're talking to a system that does have ability to converse in REST, right? Like, for example, I don't know, if everybody speaks English, it's easy, right? If somebody speaks another language, I don't know, French or German, right? It will be kind of nice to have an interpreter that will allow us to kind of have a fluent conversation, right? Not favoring one language versus another, right? But when everybody speaks English, we just pass English through this interpreter. If a different translation is required, we can pass a different translation and not necessarily slow things down, right? So in other words, when we need to do heavy lifting, we'll do it. But if everything is accessible native, why would we translate the rest, right? Oh, sorry guys, that's supposed to be muted. Okay. All right, so okay, let's see what this thing is showing. Just 1 second. Okay, all right, so this is pretty much, actually, you know what, I think I have a slide for this thing. Okay, so, all right, so now we're going to focus on the micro app service communicating with the system of records. Kind of, that's the usual terminology here, but pretty much with the target system. So as I mentioned, SSL certificates, fully certified certificates, in other words, with the public authority, right, that is in charge of the root and intermediary certificates, right? We have to get those certs, right? That's kind of a requirement. And what you notice, you quite likely will be required to get certificate for every single system that you have. So you have a risk of certificate sprawl if you use it as is. The second element you might find out when you play with micro apps, while micro apps are designed to actually do some simple stuff, you don't want to make a gigantic application out of micro app. It'll kind of go against the premise what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to do something simple, similar to microservices, right? The idea of micro is it just does maybe one task, maybe a few simple things, right? And the strength of the approach is that you have a collection of those, right, that can do something very, very complex, but at the same time, very easy to manage, very organic and so forth, right? So here, because of the number of certs we'll have to deal with, you might find out that you actually have more micro apps than you like to have. So in other words, sometimes it's maybe makes sense for one micro app to do 3 different things, right? So in other words, why force the micro app to do one thing just because you have one type of connectivity per micro app, right? So this is kind of a one thing sprawl of micro apps that also could be an issue, but we will address it. And then the question is, you know, can we talk to other things, right? Can we talk to some things in the cloud that are REST native or not, right? And by the way, when we talk about REST, well, there are all sorts of other ways to converse, right? Like, for example, home core bar, right? What if you have, let's say, like a SOAP requirement? Just 1 second, let me hang up. The phone call kept coming in. Anyway, so the point is there are many questions. Well, how can we talk to those external systems? And then, as I mentioned, how do we talk to our other cloud connectors? That could be also not completely straightforward. Okay, so what are we proposing? Okay, so if we take an SSL bridge, and to be more exact, SSL TLS bridge, right? Because yeah, who's using SSL these days, right? So, but the point is, it's a SSL TLS bridge, right? It could be Citrix ADC, which is actually falls really nicely into this particular niche, right? I'll have some references to, if you're planning to play with it, kind of a dev environment, there's some free alternatives, right? So I'll give you some references. But the point is, the task of SSL Bridge will be just to pass our requests to our target systems. And when those requests are passed, so there's a certificate on the target system, right, that is legitimized by SSL Bridge by making sure that the IP address is resolved to a fully qualified name, right, that matches certificate, right? And in this case, and again, I'm not saying that you should have one certificate for everything, but all of a sudden, if you hide your infrastructure behind a SSL bridge, you can pretty much have as few or as many certificates as you actually need, right? So in other words, you're not bound to all of a sudden start, purchasing certificates just because you have more and more systems to connect to, right? So that's one thing. Behind the SSL bridge, what we do, we're hiding our, I call it low-code app proxy, and I'll give you the recipe with how actually this thing can be built. I noticed that there were quite a few different languages that people use during this conference, right? It's up to you what you want to use. I use .NET Core, but again, by any stretch, use whatever you guys comfortable with. But the point is this: so a request comes in on pretty much port 443 for SSL Bridge. Well, sure, it can come on another port, but this connection has to be encrypted and passed through SSL Bridge. Hits our proxy, and then our proxy, based on the URI in the request, will figure out what to do with this thing, right? So, well, first, do we need to translate it from the REST request to something else? And then where do we send it, right? And what the app proxy will do, it will send it back to the SSL bridge on a different port corresponding to the application, right? So this way, what we do, we're decoupling actually our app proxy and our micro app service from actually the knowledge where our target systems are located. So SSL Bridge will know about the physical location, right? Basically, what the IP addresses are we're supposed to forward the traffic to. But SSL Bridge will not see the traffic because it's encrypted and it's a pass-through traffic through SSL Bridge. At the same time, local app proxy and micro app services will have no idea where those systems are, nor should they really care, right? As long as we can direct it to the right port on SSL Bridge and then forward this thing. So in essence, the formula is bridge proxy URL, right? And the port per application. right? And if you take a look at actually how microapps are coded, this thing integrates really easily with microapps. So you don't need to keep track where you're forwarding this request because our proxy will take care of it, and things actually look very, very native to microapps. And then since we pretty much can talk, if we need to talk REST, we can talk REST. If you guys are really good with PowerShell, and this is kind of an area where selection of .NET Core is kind of conducive because we can easily from the same server trigger PowerShell scripts, right? And by the way, if you take a look, and again, I have references at the end, how Microsoft development environments built, your Visual Studio can, publish this thing to the local IIS Express, to IIS server, or push it into Azure, right? That's actually the amount of time it takes to kind of do those things is amazing. So, like, there's a demo application that Microsoft has. That's a demo template that's built into some of those. Some of the examples that I'm going to talk about. It takes literally 30 seconds for you to get a functional web service going. I think it's a weather report or something like this, but it shows you pretty much the power of this thing, right? And once you get the template application, you can actually take a look at the code. Even if you're not familiar with C#, you'll notice that things are actually quite straightforward, right? So they took care of the plumbing for you, right? And you can sure thing make it kind of actually quite sophisticated area authentication and other trimmings to it, right? But in essence, the amount of code that was required for the app that I just showed you integrating with Zen Server, we're talking about like 500 lines of code at the most, right? So it was a fairly small application, but it's actually with fairly decent impact, right? So anyway, so the point here is this. SSL Bridge, one component of this app interpreter, micro app interpreter, low-code app proxy, the second component, and together they will reduce the number of the certs that you will need, or pretty much it's up to you how many certs you like to use. The number of micro apps, and this is the thing on the left, will also be kind of controlled by your kind of business needs versus by the number of connections that you expecting to have, right? And this thing integrates very nicely pretty much with anything. If you want to have an SSH connection going somewhere, no problem. You can start your SSH connection, do this thing in the background, or you need to integrate, I don't know, PowerShell, as I mentioned, or whatever other script. Like, for example, you can hook up sysinternals to start a notepad on your personal computer. You can do that as well, right? So anyway, so let's go further. All right. Okay, I think it's just a repeat. Sorry, guys. All right. So this is just the summary, right? That just I went through, right? So in essence, you'll just need to have pretty much one IP that will correspond to the fully qualified URL for the bridge. Applications will go per port. And if you have RESTful interfaces, great. If not, you can make your own and pretty much do the translation. Okay. All right. So now, talking about simplifying things. Now, since you do have that proxy, it's very easy to hook up debugger to it. And you can see exactly what's coming across the wire, right? Maybe you made some mistake in the micro app. Maybe the way things are formatted are not working right? So you can actually see it for yourself and fix it fairly quick. All right, so let's take a look what we have for the demo. Okay, so the sound is turned off. Sorry, guys, I'm just playing my screen here. Let's see what I have here. Oh. All right, so it's okay. Let me scroll through. Well, this is just a demo how we can create a snapshots for individual virtual machine. Again, the end user will see what's on the phone, and if the admin wants to monitor what's happening, that's pretty much what's happening on the backend, right? So we are doing snapshots right now. By the way, while this thing is playing, let me tell you something anecdotal. You might notice, and if you see a bunch of micro apps presentations, you do see icons for kind of the title. You can put some graphics in it, but you never see icons on the buttons. This is, I think, the only micro app that I know of that actually has icons, right? So the point is, this thing supports emojis, right? So you can stick emojis anywhere you want inside the micro apps, right? So whatever icons are available among known emojis, In this particular case, iPhone is pulling the graphics that is on iPhone. And if you have, let's say, a web browser, emojis will be different, but pretty much within the same theme, right? And the only thing you have to do, you have to be careful if you do send those emojis across the wire, right? I'm doing UTF encoding of what I'm sending to my app proxy, right? So just don't mess up your requests, right? So it's like sending, I don't know, spaces or whatever, the underscores, right, through your eyes. So you have to kind of be careful. But the beauty is this thing does support those icons. And whoever is playing with microapps, so you can kind of add it to your arsenal. Like, as you can see here, a back icon, you can just easily add it to it. So pretty much fairly straightforward thing to do. Kind of make it a little bit livelier. And I'm sure the microapps team will probably put some kind of more elaborate way to spice up the interface. But for right now, as you can see, all these icons here, yeah, they're coming from emojis, right? So with the exception of this guy, but and this guy, right? So all the buttons are done with emojis. Anyway, all right. So well, apparently this thing works, and here I'm creating a bunch of snapshots. All right. So, all right. Now let's take a look. Sorry, guys, I have. Okay, let me get out of here. All right, back to the demo. All right, here from current slide. Alex will probably be editing it heavily, but let's see. All right, step by step. So, well, how are we actually going to do it, right? So let's take a full look at a few recipes, right? Well, first get access to microapps, right? So you can get evaluation, and once you get evaluation, you will, if you want to hook up your on-prem things, you will have to get the, let me pause it right here, the connector appliance, right? Now, if you're not working with on-prem systems, right? Let's say you can stick your app proxy with this SSL Bridge into the cloud, then things kind of a little bit easier. You don't need to worry about this particular case, but what I'm trying to say is this. This is probably the most difficult case, and you can easily handle it. So that's why I'm kind of going through it. But once you get the connect appliance, and by the way, this is the your URL if you want to take a look where to get it. That's pretty much where you get it. And once you have it, so what will happen is you will have to register it with your environment, right? And you know, there's different flavors available. In this particular case, it's Citrix Hypervisor, but Hyper-V VMware is supported as well. You download it, and let's see what other steps. Yeah, and then this is a little bit confusing. You have to use the GUID for the appliance, how to register it. But once you do, right, and you do provide the fully qualified name, let me pause it right here, for, let me see if I can go back. Yeah, fully qualified name for your target system, which in this particular case is going to be the SSL Bridge, right, behind which we have the proxy, right? So that will be sufficient to actually integrate this pretty much cloud-based service with something that's on-prem. And again, if you work purely with the cloud, then you can actually avoid using the connect appliance, hook it up directly. So it will be a little bit easier. Okay. All right. Let's go to step second. Now, NGX Server, and I know it's a very technical crowd. You guys probably know a bunch of other examples. It was actually a quite convenient way of getting started without necessarily buying appliances for the dev environment. But take a look at NGX Server, right? You can pretty much set up SSL TLS Bridge with it fairly quickly. One easy way of doing it, you can go to Turnkey Linux and actually download appliance where everything either is pre-installed. I just selected to use Debian Linux and installed it myself, but they actually do have an appliance with already NGX installed on it. And here's the barcode if you guys want to scan it. And here's a really nice article that pretty much explains step by step how to configure it. It's just pretty much a text file where you're going to supply the target IP addresses, right? And here you go. You pretty much got your proxy configured. All right, now app proxy, right? Again, choice of your language. It's up to you what language to use, right? Nice thing about And by the way, this is a series of articles from Microsoft. There are actually, I think, a couple tutorials how to do it. This is the first one. Talks about pretty much everything under the sun, how to get it going. But in essence, the beauty of this approach is that, first of all, if you get your hands on a Microsoft development environment, some of which are actually free, right? You can put this thing together fairly easily, and again, you will have easy integration with PowerShell if you need to, right? So we've done that, and let's see what else is here. So what this thing does, I think it will go a little bit more through pretty much any hoops that we'll have to jump through, right? Okay, let me get this thing through real quick. You've seen that. But what I'll do, I'll show you actually the raw code that went into communication with our proxy. Oh man, hold on. Okay, all right. Okay, Alex, I don't have it, but let me talk you guys through. So the bottom line is this. Let's say you want to authenticate to a system. Like in my case, I was authenticated to Citrix Hypervisor, right? And that was the first step to integrate Microapp with a system, right, of record. You have to talk to it, right? You have to authenticate first. And what I found that if you take a look at Citrix Hypervisor Zen server, it has a couple ways of kind of hooking into it, and kind of we'll keep SSH aside. Let's say if you want to do it through HTTP, right? For the most part, authentication usually will happen with XML, right? Now, with microapps, you usually are going to be looking at JSON body of your requests, right? So what happened? Here we go. All right, pause it right here. All right, so this is pretty much native request to Citrix Hypervisor, right? So if you do it through JSON, that's what's going to happen, right? So you have two parameters to pass. You have Zen for the username and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is password, right? And then there is a method which tells the target system that we're trying to log in. It's called session.login with password, right? Sounds like straightforward. The trick is this: microapps expect from you name value pairs, right? And I think at least this time, right? It's comfortable with name value pairs where, let's say, the name is user, the value is Zen, like username, right? The name is password, and then there will be corresponding value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you won't be able to format requests like this through microapps. And the beauty of microapps proxy is this. So what we'll do, we'll translate it into something like this, where we have a name value pair, which microapps are very comfortable with, right? So that's the first hoop we'll run through, right? So then once you authenticate, what you get the token. So in the lingo of Zen server, it's opaque reference ID, which you can use now to retrieve information about that system, right? Like, for example, enumerate virtual machines. So go through. And then what you might find out, let me actually play it. This is the response you're going to get, right? The reason I have Russian dolls in the right upper corner is that you're going to get a nested object structure. So in other words, you will have a JSON inside, pretty much, that will have a bunch of objects inside of each other, right? And again, if you're familiar with microapps, microapps are more they're much happier with a flat structure, right? Using which they can build your tables, which you can query them with a microapp, and life is good. This is a nested structure, and I would say it's a nightmare. Just look at it, right? So the point is, what we can do, we can actually take it and flatten it. Like, for example, we're requesting virtual machines, right? Boom. So we can have all the parameters that we need for us to work with virtual machines, right? Unique identifiers, the names of virtual machines. If you want to drop in, amount of RAM available, what kind of storage is attached to virtual machine, we can actually all flatten it. So in other words, not putting any burden on our micro app, right? We actually do it on our proxy, right? That's fairly straightforward because we get the entire nested object, we can easily parse it and then flatten it, right? So once we do that, let's see. Another thing is, let's say you have snapshots, right? When we deal with snapshots, let's say if you want to revert to a previous snapshot, right? There are different ways of telling which snapshot is which, right? But one of the easy ways is pretty much the timestamp, right? If something is newer than another snapshot that's for sure one thing came after another. Well, this is a POSIX Datestamp, which microapps are not compatible at the moment. But with microapp proxy, we can easily translate this thing. It's a little bit abbreviated, but pretty much we're translating an ISO timestamp, and there are like about 15 timestamps available, time formats available, but this is not one of them. So we'll translate it to the one that's compatible, right? Which is an ISO timestamp, and all of a sudden, boom, it's easy on the microapp. Then another thing is this. Notice we're dealing with HTTP requests. Well, how do we talk to PowerShell, right? So our proxy can pretty much talk to the CVAD servers, right? Run the PowerShell and return some of the parameters that we need, like machine name, the host ID, and so forth. So once we run this thing, notice it returned the hosted machine ID, which in the lingo of Citrix Hypervisor is UUID, unique identifier, which will identify that virtual machine that that particular user has. In this particular case, this user name is Paul. This is the hosted machine name, and we'll also know the host name and so forth, right? And then once we're done with that, if we take a look at pretty much again the this nested JSON response, we can find the same UID in there, right? Pretty much compare them, and here's our filter. So all of a sudden, we took two systems that pretty much cannot talk to each other, right? And we're able to, filter anything that's not related to this user, because, let's say if user has 1, 2, 10 virtual machines, they probably should not be taking snapshots or rebooting somebody else's machines, right? That they will see if the filter is not applied. So that pretty much demonstrates that you can do it in real time, very easy, and you can pretty much complement your new microapp skills with your existing PowerShell Guru skills, okay? And at the end of the day, Alex, I think this is what it is. So